Hey guys, welcome back to T-Bones Tech. In today's video, we are going to be comparing the Canon 17-55mm F2.8 lens against the Sigma 18-35mm F1.8 lens. Both of these lenses are wildly popular for shooting video, so in today's video, we are going to be comparing the two. So first off, the Sigma has a maximum aperture of f1.8, which is a full stop faster than the Canon, which has a maximum aperture of f2.8. But the Canon does have its own advantages. It has 3 stops of image stabilization, and it also has a longer focal length of 55mm on the Canon and only 35mm on the Sigma. And that means that the Canon has a much more versatile focal length. Here's the Canon at 17mm, zooming all the way into 55mm. As you can see, it's a little jittery, not very smooth, but it does have a very nice focal range. It allows you to shoot wide or pretty telephoto. Now let's take a look at the Sigma. We're shooting here at 18mm and zooming all the way into 35. So with the Sigma, we don't have nearly as much zoom, but the zoom is definitely much smoother than it is on the Canon. The Canon has a 35mm equivalent of 27mm all the way to 88mm, and the Sigma has a 35mm equivalent of 29mm to 56. As far as build quality goes, the Sigma is built much better than the Canon is, and the Sigma will give you very smooth zooming shots, and the focus is also going to be very smooth. But the Canon zoom ring isn't nearly quite as smooth, and the build quality just isn't nearly as good as the Sigma's. The focus ring also feels pretty bad, but it definitely does get the job done. As far as autofocus goes, both these lenses have very fast and accurate autofocus. I think the Sigma is just a little bit better than the Canon. But later in this video, I'm going to show you a video focus test using both these different lenses and put them side by side so you can decide which has better autofocus for yourself. The Canon has a filter size of 77mm and the Sigma has a filter size of 72mm. Both these two lenses have mounts for hoods. Unfortunately, I only have one for the Sigma and I don't own one for the Canon, but both these lenses do have the option to put one on. As far as length goes, the Canon is shorter than the Sigma, but its diameter actually makes it wider than the Sigma. But as far as weight goes, the Canon weighs in at only 645 grams, while the Sigma is pretty heavy and weighs 810. Now let's get into some sample video of these two lenses. The first lens we're going to take a look at is the Canon, then we're going to jump over to the Sigma. So here is the Canon 17-55mm lens with IS turned on. So you guys can see the video really isn't too jittery even as I'm moving the camera along on these different subjects. We are filming this video with the Canon 80D using Canon's dual pixel AF, and this lens seems to be doing a great job at keeping our subjects in focus. Now switching over to the Sigma, we can see that the video is much more jittery than the Canon because the Sigma does not have IS and all this video was handheld. So you can see the video is definitely sharp and that the camera is doing a very good job at keeping the different subjects in focus. But without IS or any image stabilization gear, things are getting very shaky. If you're just planning on shooting handheld video, definitely get the Canon. Alright, now we're going to dive into the image quality here on the Canon 17-55mm lens. So we shot this picture wide open at f2.8 and we also shot it at 17mm. So we're going to zoom in here to the middle of the screen to check the sharpness. Here we can see it actually is relatively sharp here at 17mm. Take a look at the rust here on this metal sun. Now let's take a look at what this image looks like stop down to f4, and here at f4 we can definitely see that we gain a good amount of extra detail here on the rust and here on the brick. Let's stop it down one more stop to f5.6, and again here we can see even sharper results. Now stopping it down one more stop to f8, we can see that we don't really gain too much extra detail here at f8 versus f5.6. Now let's go back to f2.8 and we're going to take a look at the vignetting here wide open on this lens. And here we can see this lens definitely does suffer from some vignetting. Let's see what it looks like stop down to f4. Here we can see f4 definitely gives us a little bit more light here in the corners. And now let's take a look at f5.6, and here at f5.6 basically it's not any brighter than it was at f4. So if you want to completely get rid of vignetting, definitely stop down this lens from f2.8 to f4, and that's going to really clear up the vignetting on this lens. Alright, now we switch over to the Sigma 18-35mm F1.8 lens. We shot this picture wide open at f1.8, and we're also shooting this at 18mm. So here in the middle we can see at f1.8 the picture is definitely very sharp. Again, take a look at the rust here on this metal sun. Now let's take a look at what it looks like stop down to f2.8. And here at f2.8 we can see we gain a ton of extra detail, and this picture seems to be very sharp. Now let's stop it down again, one more stop to f4, and here at f4 we don't really gain too much sharpness at all, and that means that this lens is razor sharp at f2.8. Now let's go back to f1.8 and take a look at the sharpness in the corners of this picture. So let's zoom into the corner here and check our sharpness. So here in the corners, the Sigma wide open at f1.8 really didn't do a good job at all. We can see a lot of chromatic aberration here on this brick. We can also see a ton of vignetting here in the corners. Let's take a look at it stop down to f2.8, and here at f2.8 we can see we gain a ton of extra sharpness here, and we also lose a little bit of this chromatic aberration. At f2.8 we also lose a little bit of that vignetting, and the corners aren't quite as dark at f2.8 as they are at f1.8. Let's stop it down to f4. And here at f4 we can see the corners get even brighter, and the sharpness seems to be about the same as it was at f2.8, but the chromatic aberration here on this brick seems to be about the exact same. Now stop down to f5.6, we can still see some chromatic aberration, and here at f8 we start to barely lose the chromatic aberration, but there's still definitely a good amount of chromatic aberration here in the corners at f8, and I'm honestly really surprised about that. Alright, so now it's time to directly compare both these lenses against each other. The picture on the left was shot with the Sigma, and the picture on the right was shot with the Canon. The Sigma was shot at 18mm, and the Canon was shot at 17. And here at 17mm, we can instantly see that it's a little bit wider here than the Sigma was. So we can see this extra layer of brick here at the top, and then we can see an extra little half layer here on the bottom. Take a look at this white brick here on the Canon. It's very even visible here on the Sigma. So both these pictures do have a 1mm difference, so definitely keep that in mind when I'm comparing the image quality of both these two lenses. The Sigma on the left was shot wide open at f1.8, and the Canon was shot wide open at f2.8. So this first comparison is going to be both these lenses wide open at their fastest available apertures. So we're going to start by zooming into the middle of the brick to check image quality. And here in the middle, it definitely seems to be a tie as to which has a little bit more detail. The Sigma looks like it has a tiny bit more detail, but again, we're also zoomed in by 1 extra millimeter, and that could give us the effect of a little bit extra quality. Now let's zoom out and take a look at the corners. Here in the corners, it seems like the Canon is actually a lot brighter than the Sigma is. Now let's zoom into the corners to check for vignetting and sharpness. Here we can see the Sigma seems to be a little bit darker here on the corners and suffers from a little bit worse vignetting than the Canon does. But as far as sharpness goes, I think that the Sigma is just a little bit sharper here than the Canon is in the corners. But both these pictures were shot wide open. Now let's compare what the Sigma looks like at f1.8 versus the Canon at f1.8. Alright, so now both the Sigma and the Canon were shot at f2.8. So let's zoom into the brick here and see which is sharper. And here the Sigma at f2.8 absolutely blows away the Canon as far as sharpness goes. Zooming into the metal here on this sun, we can see so much more detail here on the Sigma. And taking a look at the corners, we can see that the Sigma is much sharper than the Canon is. And that's because the Sigma was stopped down to f2.8. And the Canon was still shooting wide open. But something that I'm noticing with the Sigma is we can see a lot of chromatic aberration here on this brick, and with the Canon we almost don't see any at all. I definitely wasn't expecting to see that type of result from the Sigma. So this green color on the bottom of this brick on the Sigma really doesn't belong. It wasn't there at all. That is the lens suffering from chromatic aberration. Here we can see more of a magenta chromatic aberration here on the brick on the Canon, but the chromatic aberration on the Sigma looks a lot worse than on the Canon. Alright, here we have both these pictures stopped down to f4 now. So the Sigma is stopped down to f4, and so is the Canon. So let's zoom into the middle brick here and check for sharpness. In here we can see that the sharpness of both these lenses is about the same. Maybe the Sigma is a little bit more sharper, but again, keep in mind the Sigma was shot at 1mm longer than the Canon. Let's take a look at the detail here on the rust, and again, it seems like the Sigma is a little bit sharper than the Canon. Now let's go up to the corners and check for sharpness, chromatic aberration, and vignetting. In here on the Sigma, again, we can see a good amount of chromatic aberration. I really don't understand why this chromatic aberration is so prevalent here on the Sigma, but for whatever reason, the Sigma really didn't do a good job handling chromatic aberration, where with this Canon, there's really not a lot of chromatic aberration at all. The Sigma seems to be a little bit sharper than the Canon, but when it comes to chromatic aberration, it's not even close. The Canon is definitely the winner. Now taking a look at this brick here, we can see that the Sigma does seem like it is a little bit more sharp, but then zooming into this plant, again, we can see more chromatic aberration on the Sigma, and on the Canon, we almost don't see any chromatic aberration at all. So it seems like the Sigma is sharpest, but it comes at a cost of a lot of chromatic aberration, but chromatic aberration can be easily fixed in post. So as image quality goes, it seems like the Sigma is overall the sharper lens, but definitely has a few downsides. But both of these lenses are absolutely fantastic. I would say the best overall lens is the Canon because it does have image stabilization, and that makes a huge difference in video. The Canon is definitely the best overall running and gunning option, but if you're shooting most of your video with tripods, sliders, and gimbals, I would choose the Sigma. It's an overall sharper lens. But that's all I got for you guys in this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give this video a big thumbs up down below, and of course, make sure to subscribe to this channel and then be notified every single time I put a brand new video to this YouTube channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one.